Hello.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Katarina. Hi, Sophie. And welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Flourish Financially Money conversation. And we have a special guest here, Katarina. So it's going to be a very fun conversation. We're really happy to have you here, and we really appreciate your presence. This community truly matters to us, and we don't take it lightly that you choose to spend this hour with us today.
Of course.
My name, of course, is Minna Schmidt. I'm a financial coach and co-founder of Flourish Financially, and I support women in building more financial freedom and security. And Sophie?
Thank you, Mina. I'm Sophie, so Dr. Sophie for some of you, and I'm a certified life coach and positive psychology practitioner. I specialize in emotional intelligence, leadership, also financial psychology. My work really focuses on helping women who are in demanding careers or specific tricky life transitions to navigate change with greater clarity, confidence, and self-trust. So together with Mina, we have created Flourish Financially as a space where conversations about money go beyond spreadsheets and strategies, and we include emotions, identity, relationships, and meaning.
Yes, and this is exactly why we are here today, right? Beautiful topic. This is the first conversation this year, and many people have told us they're super curious about this one, even if it's a slightly uncomfortable topic at times, right? And it is indeed the love, money, and attachment. So, if we're honest, right? Money is rarely just about money. It's about safety. It's about autonomy, independence. It's about trust, power, belonging, and of course relationships are so key to all of that, right? So that's a really exciting topic for today, what we're going to talk about.
And yes, what we also wanted to say from the start is really that this conversation, what we're going to talk about, is not about diagnosing yourself or diagnosing the partner. It's not about necessarily labeling. When we're talking about psychology, it's important to keep that in mind. And it's certainly not about like what you should do to get this right, because there is no right or wrong answer. But it's really about understanding maybe the emotional architecture behind the money behaviors in relationships. And yes, because our relationship with money can be a bit of a mirror of the relationship that we have with other people. It's about closeness, safety, vulnerability, etc.
Exactly, and that's of course what we do at Flourish Financially, combining this practical side with the emotional side of finances. So to explore this with very much depth and nuance, we are really delighted to welcome you, Katarina. You are exactly someone whose work sits at this intersection. Relationships, right? Of course, self-awareness, behavior, psychology. That's a lot about the work you do, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And before we dive in, if you allow me, I would like to say a few words to introduce you properly. So Katarina Polonska is a relationship coach and behavioral science-informed practitioner who works primarily with high-achieving individuals and couples on intimacy, attachment patterns, and relational decision-making. So you have a master's degree from the University of Oxford, and her academic background includes work on gender dynamics and human behavior. She is the founder of the Successfully in Love methodology and podcast, through which she helps individuals and couples to understand how unconscious relational patterns, emotional regulation, attachment dynamics that we're going to touch on today shape the way they relate, communicate, and build safety in their relationships. So, Katarina, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. And what a great description of my work. Thank you for that.
Any more you want to add?
Very succinct. No, it's perfect.
Great. So, Mina, would you like to start with the first question, perhaps?
Yes, but maybe still, Katarina, I would love to ask
Yeah.
before we dive in, because people online don't know you that well yet. What is actually that you do? You probably get this question a lot, right? What is your work about?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I was going to put it really simply, I help executives who are in relationships fix their relationships or decide whether they should stay or go. And I help single executives create healthy relationships. And even yesterday, actually, I had my first call with a number of my clients, all of them celebrating being abroad with their new partners. There was a couple in Hawaii, traveling around, which is really wonderful to see. So I focus on high-performing individuals, largely because they have a certain mentality, a certain kind of wiring, quote unquote, that I understand very well. Obviously, given my background, my Oxford kind of peers, and the circles that I grew up with, people are very high achieving. And what I noticed throughout my own life and what I noticed across my peer groups was that you can be very high achieving and you can be very successful academically, professionally, even financially, even health wise. It doesn't mean that you're going to have a great romantic relationship. And it doesn't even mean that you will actually be great at relationships in general. So just in brief, my own pattern was that I always considered myself a little bit of a lone wolf. I was like, I work best alone. I like to focus. I'm very, very high achieving, very driven, very hardworking. But when it came to teamwork in the corporations that I used to be at, I much preferred to be on my own. I didn't necessarily like authority. I didn't necessarily like working in a team. I felt people held me back. All of these things were attachment issues that I just wasn't aware of back then. And concurrently, my romantic relationships didn't really work out throughout my 20s and early 30s. And it took a lot of that inner work to land upon what is going on here. And that's what really led me to my work now.
Wow, that's so interesting, because yes, and I love this what you were saying, Katarina, that people who are extremely high performing in so many of the other areas of their life, right? But then they are somehow not that good with in relationships, right? And it's almost like they're, well, I don't know, you tell us how it is, right? But they're like used to relying on themselves. It's very lonely up there at the top, right? You fought your way up, perhaps. You've had all these experiences, so you're only relying on yourself, independent, right? Successful. And how does that fit then with the other people in your life?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things at play here. Yes, it is lonely at the top. I hear that time and time and time again. And it's not even lonely at the top if you're a CEO. Of course, it's lonely at the top. No one really gets it. But you don't even have to be a CEO. You just have to be someone who considers themselves to be intelligent and hardworking. You look around and there aren't necessarily that many people who are aligned with your worldview. So, I wasn't a CEO in my 20s, but I still felt lonely because nobody really understood why I was doing 12 hours in the library, rather than going, I still was partying and drinking my socks off, but I wasn't, I was working hard. They called me the Duracell bunny because I always had energy to show up and to work and to do all this stuff. So there's a very literal, real level of being lonely, but also on that deeper, if we think about the subconscious experience, that inner nervous system experience that's happening for us internally on an emotional level, it is lonely because a lot of high performers, their ambition is intrinsically linked to the patterns, to the wiring or the wounding. It depends what terminology you want to use. The way that they have been conditioned from a very early age, typically from childhood, to be. It's not a coincidence that ambition is often linked to loneliness, right? Not always, of course, it's a generalization, but that is the trend that I see. And there are deeper patterns at play. And it is those deeper patterns that I focus on in my work. And this isn't to say that you can't be ambitious and well-connected and well-resourced. I mentioned to you earlier before we even started this call, my goal is to double my business again this year. I'm very happily married. I feel very well connected. I feel very, very well rested, apart from Christmas Eve, as you know. I feel very, very well resourced, and I've done the work. So you can still be ambitious and have all of the benefits of feeling confident in your relationships. They don't have to be mutually exclusive, which is, again, I would argue, a third factor. When we think about society, the cultural narratives that we've been fed, it generally is do you want to be a career woman or a mother? Do you want to have a healthy career or do you want to have a healthy marriage? It's a dichotomy. We're told that we have to choose, which isn't true. Yes, you might have to choose your priorities at certain times, absolutely. But it doesn't have to be a multi-year experiment of you being, one or the other. So there's different threads to pull upon here. And I look at all of these in my work, but it really does center around that high-performing individual who, feels lonely.
It's interesting because one thing that you were saying is kind of also that these people, they have a different reason why they are so high performing, right? It could be driven by this kind of I'm not enough, or like kind of the super high expectations, or these kind of things, which can again translate to not really feeling safe in your relationships, I guess, right?
Exactly. So the way I like to think about this, and this is really inspired by one of my teachers, Thais Gibson, who's brilliant at this work, is we can think about our upbringing, our conditioning, again, our wiring, depending on the terminology, as stemming from a series of core incidents or core wounds, she would call them. I call them subconscious blocks because it's a little less intimidating than calling it a core wound. But these are experiences that happened in our formative years. Between the ages of 0 and 8, our brain is really ripe and forming. We don't even have the full brainwave capacity. Our brains are like a little sponge. And all we're doing is taking in all of the information and data and experiences around us and making it about ourselves. That's how children learn about the world. They learn about their role in the world and how to attach to the world, to others. And so, of course, this continues beyond 8 years old, and it actually continues throughout our adult years. But really, those years are the most formative. And so in those years, as we are absorbing everything that's happening around us, we are getting experiences and we are making them about ourselves. And of course, not all of the experiences are going to be good. You talk to somebody like Gabor Mate, and he would argue that trauma starts happening the minute we come out the womb. You're left in your cot and you're in hospital. Your mother's out there, getting her first coffee or whatever. And, I don't know if you can drink coffee after
Trauma, right?
But the point is that you are lying in your cot and you're crying for attention and no one's coming to you. That's going to be a micro trauma. And if that happens time and time again, because let's say that your mother is really busy and maybe she's financially restricted and has to go back to work really early, that's going to become a bigger issue, a bigger experience for you. And it's going to become part of your formative experiences. So when we think about a lot of high performers and we think about where does that ambition come from? And again, this is a bit of a generalization because of course you don't have to be a high performer to have the same conditioning, right? If I look at members of my family, for example, we might have had the same or similar experiences growing up, but the outcomes have been very different. So there is an element of real personality here. But those formative experiences, let's say, I'll use myself as an example, born in Eastern Europe, there's a lot of chaos around, a lot of change, communism ending. That, of course, is something that as a little child, I would have felt and experienced. Wouldn't understand it, but I would have experienced my mother and father being very confused, very stressed, obviously financially trying to figure out what are they going to do? Are they going to stay? Are they going to move countries? A lot of this anxiety. So as a little child, what do? We take that anxiety, we internalize it, and we make interpretations about ourselves. I must be the reason that there is anxiety going on. And if that continues over time, and let's say that the mum and dad are absent, as mine were, because they were both busy and trying to figure out their careers and both PhD academics, then they're absent. So again, child makes a conclusion about themselves. Well, mum and dad aren't around. I'm alone. This must mean that I am somebody who is alone. I am lonely. It might also mean that I have been abandoned. If a little child is left on their own, they have been abandoned. You can't abandon an adult, but you can abandon a child. They're helpless. That might be another belief. I am helpless. I am powerless. I am weak. It might also drum into the belief of, I must be unworthy, because otherwise, why would they not be here? It must mean that I'm not good enough. I had a lot of criticism growing up through no fault of my parents' own. It was just how they'd been taught to parent, push a child, tell them that they can do better, tell them that they can reach for the stars. So my parents were very much that mentality of telling me I can achieve anything in the world I want. I can be prime minister. That all sounds great in theory, but what was the overarching message I received? The message was, nothing I do is ever going to be good enough, because inherently it's never going to be good enough, right? And so these little experiences, which don't seem trauma with a capital T, if they happen continuously on repeat, because the subconscious mind is formed through emotion and repetition, these become entrenched neural pathways and entrenched ideas about who we are. And these become, as Thijs Gibson would call them, core wounds. They become our formative sense of self. And I'd call them subconscious blocks, because they block us. Because the way that the subconscious mind works, again, to oversimplify it, is that it runs 95 to 97% of your reality. So if your subconscious mind believes something about you, it starts to dictate your RAS. It starts to dictate the filter through within which you are taking in the data of the world around you. It starts to shape your experience of the world around you. So if I have a formative experience that I am alone because mum and dad are absent, and I have a different caregiver, and then I move to England, which is my experience, and then I'm in the playground, and there's all these children around. If I have a belief that I'm somebody who is alone, am I really going to go up to these children and try to make friends? Of course I'm not. I'm going to sit back, and I'm probably going to sit there with my little arms folded, feeling like I'm not good enough and I'm unworthy and I'm alone, and not talk to anyone. And because I don't talk to anyone, guess what? I don't make friends. And then I don't have friends. And then the external reality for me is I don't have friends. I'm alone. And that then continues and continues and continues and continues until eventually there's another belief of, well, I'm just a lone wolf. I work best on my own. I don't like being in teams. I don't like authority. I'm an entrepreneur. There's another saying that entrepreneur is the trauma response, right? And just to kind of feed into the ambition piece, all of this, if you think about it, and again, using myself as an example, I have a belief that I'm not good enough and that I'm somehow, no matter how hard I try, it's never going to be good enough. But I also believe that I'm maybe helpless or powerless. You can bet that I'm going to be trying to prove that wrong, right? I'm going to be trying to prove that wrong. That's in my case. It doesn't always have to be that way. You can also rebel against it. Sorry, that was a rebellion against it. You can also adopt it and kind of make it to be true for yourself. But I chose to rebel against it because I don't want to be not good enough. So I began shooting for the stars, aiming really high, trying to prove that I am yourself. But of course, it's never going to feel good enough, because on that internal subconscious level, my worldview is that it's not good enough. So rather than focusing on, hold on a second, I just got a scholarship to Oxford, my brain's going to look at, well, who else got a scholarship to Oxford? How many other people am I in competition with, right? And then I'm then going to go to my mother, who's going to ask the same question and say, well, why aren't you doing a PhD? And so then it's going to continue and continue and continue until you are CEO, making your millions, and it still doesn't feel good enough, and you're still unfulfilled. And of course, this will bleed into your relationships, which we haven't even touched upon, but it entirely impacts the relationships and the quality of the relationship that you receive.
Absolutely. And this is it's like you're never going to meet that internal standard, which is so high. It's always higher, right? It's this like, I'm not enough. I'm not deserving. I'm not, this will always kind of just run away from you, right? Unless you do that.
Exactly. Exactly. And just to add to that, with the relationships, if somebody's walking around with a worldview of not having enough, how can a relationship ever feel good enough for you? Of course it can't. Nothing in your life's ever going to feel good enough. There's always going to be better. So you can be married to someone who is ostensibly great, but it's still not going to feel enough for you. You're not going to feel enough love. You're still going to be feeling alone in that relationship because your worldview about yourself is that you are alone. So this is why when it comes to working with, high performers or anyone really, I don't start with couples work because I don't find it that productive, both in my own personal experience in doing couples work, but also just looking at the data. I would argue it's much, much, much more effective to take the individual and to look at, okay, where are you, through no fault of your own, inadvertently contributing to the problem of your experience through your own conditioning? And how can we empower you to change that, thanks to neuroplasticity, so that you start seeing things more clearly, almost like we're giving you an upgrade on the glasses that you're wearing, right? So that you can actually start to see that, hold on a second, I am absolutely good enough. I am worthy. I am connected. And now let's see how I feel about my marriage. Now let's see how I feel about the status of my bank account from that lens, right? From that healthy, secure lens.
But Katarina, if we take a step back from this, because I think one of your specialty area is really to use the lens of the attachment style, or can you tell a little bit more about that for people maybe that are not so familiar with the types that are, I think if I understand this a little bit, under these, and how would you see this playing out actually then in relationships and then maybe also in money? And
Great question. Great question. So everything that I just described about the different blocks that you can have, we can understand that really simply and succinctly through the lens of attachment theory. So I love attachment theory for just how simple and clean it makes understanding this. Again, of course, there are generalizations, as with any type of labels and terminology. But generally speaking, it's a great, I guess, kind of proxy to understanding what's going on. So thinking again back to those formative years when we are being shaped and our personalities are being developed and all of those subconscious blocks are slowly but surely becoming developed inside of ourselves, we can be seen as being compartmentalized into 4 different buckets. You've got what we call securely attached. These are people who, I would argue, at least in my experience, are the minority of the population. At least I don't see them reaching out to me.
Not too many of those around.
Yeah. Who are,
not your niche.
No, exactly. Who are securely attached, and they generally have very good childhoods, very good upbringings. They don't really have many blocks developing because their parents seem to know what to do. They seem to know how to attend to the child and give them that love and reassurance and safety and nourishment that they're craving. And so they grow up with generally not many blocks, if any, no core wounds. And their overarching sense of self is, I'm good enough, I'm loved, I'm safe, I'm included, I'm connected, I'm worthy, all the good things. And guess what? Their lives generally go on to be pretty simple, pretty easygoing, pretty happy. They're pretty balanced, kind of very, very, very easygoing, affable people.
Yeah.
Now, whilst I would argue that's the minority population, I don't think it is statistically
the majority now.
Yeah, the majority right now are dismissive avoidant, which I'll come to in a second.
Avoidance. Okay, interesting. Yeah, please go ahead, Katarina.
But this, secure attachment, whilst it sounds idyllic, it can be achieved. And that's what I help my clients achieve through neuroplasticity. The brain can recondition to change, right? We can remove our subconscious blocks. We can actually kind of quote unquote rewire and become this way. So if you weren't born this way, that's okay. You can develop that, which is exactly what I have done, what my husband's done, what my clients do. Life is a lot easier when you love yourself and feel good about yourself and have at inner peace with yourself. So that's the minority though at birth, or at kind of a younger age. We then have 3 other attachment styles, which we call the insecure attachment styles. And we have one which is called the anxious attachment. This was very much how I was most of my life. Anxious attachment is when we have an experience that's overwhelmingly one of abandonment growing up. Abandonment and neglect. Doesn't mean literal abandonment. So my parents were wonderful people who tried very hard and obviously loved me and were there for me, but they were they were kind of emotionally and physically absent for a lot of the time because they were working, right? They were working, they were very ambitious, they were very career driven. My father was traveling the world for a long time, making money, trying to help us, grow in the world. And so whilst it had a good cause, a good reasoning behind it, the experience for me as a little child was one that they're not around. And so anxious attachment is characterized by feeling not good enough, all the things I described, feeling not good enough, feeling unlovable, feeling rejected, feeling that they're alone, feeling that they're going to be abandoned, feeling, this is an interesting one, that they are actually maybe even bad. I hear this a lot with my clients, and this is certainly one that I heard. If their child receives a lot of criticism, or even if the parents aren't around, one conclusion that child might draw about themselves is that maybe I'm just a bad kid. Maybe I'm just a bad kid. And so for me, I actually had this very strong subconscious block around being bad. And so it meant that throughout most of my life, I felt guilty for everything. I felt guilty. I felt guilty if I did this, guilty if I did that. I felt like if I wasn't trying to be the most good, gracious, philanthropic person, I was somehow a bad person. If I wasn't getting the best grades or, doing really well as an employee, I was a bad employee. It really stung, this idea of being bad, because of such a core wound inside of me that I really didn't want to be bad. And sometimes I will say it even still flares up in my business when I'm setting boundaries and navigating certain situations, like, oh, I don't want to be bad. I really want to be good. So that's characterized with the anxious attachment. We then have two other attachment styles, which are both avoidant. We have the fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant. Dismissive avoidant is when a child is also characterized by neglect. And also, to be clear, the anxious attachment has still a lot of avoidance. It just shows up in very different ways. They avoid intimacy in different ways, right? So we have the dismissive avoidant. Dismissive avoidant is experiencing a lot of neglect in their childhood. That neglect can show up in different ways. It can show up through a parent or caregiver being very overbearing. So I see this a lot with very religious cultures, actually, in a lot of Southern European communities and actually Eastern European communities, where the parents are very controlling and very overbearing. Again, they mean well. And maybe there's, Sunday school that you have to go to. Maybe there's certain uniforms. Maybe there are certain expectations. And that child experiences emotional neglect in the sense that they don't really get an identity. They don't really get to speak back. They don't really get to make their own decisions. The parents decide for them. And so this child is robbed of their freedom and their identity. And they internalize this belief that, well, there must be something wrong with me then, because otherwise they would let me make my own decisions, right? I must be defective, that they have to speak for me. They also develop this belief that, well, I'm powerless and I'm trapped and I'm potentially weak, because again, why would they have to make all these decisions for me? I have no freedom. And so they have this really strong sense of being trapped and powerless and like there's something wrong with them. And that makes them very suspicious of intimacy later in life. Whereas the anxious attachment, who is characterized by abandonment and feeling alone, becomes very needy and craving love and craving attention and craving affection later in life. The dismissive avoidant is actually very suspicious. And they tend to be very wary of it. So then we have finally, and I will also say the dismissive avoidant is very intellectual, because they rarely got the chance in their childhood to actually express their emotions. So they never really built the muscle of emotional vocabulary, of actually dealing with emotions. Let's say their parents were like, stop crying. Children should be seen, not heard. Stop talking. Be quiet. So of course they don't develop this emotional capacity. So then later in life, they don't want to deal with emotion. They have no skills at emotions. So they become very rational, intellectual people who prefer to be alone. And guess what? Often become CEOs. Because what do you do as a CEO? You get to be on your own. Of course, you are managing and leading. So this isn't, again, generalization. But you have to be rational. You have to be very logical. You don't want to deal with a lot of emotion, right? So that's the dismissive avoidant. And then lastly, we have the fearful avoidant or disorganized attachment. And that is arguably the most complex of all of these. And I will say most of my clients actually fall into this bucket. And I certainly was, for most of my life, part of this bucket. The fearful avoidant is a blend of anxious and dismissive. And this happens when the child's parenting is actually quite chaotic. So let's say that the parents are one day there and they're really loving and really sweet. The next day they're really angry and they're really upset, and maybe they're not there anymore. Maybe one parent is traveling a lot for work, so they're there at weekends, which is my experience, and it's happy weekends, but then they're gone Monday to Friday because they're working, McKinsey consultant style, right? So they're traveling a lot, but they're there at weekends. Maybe the parent has addictions. Maybe they're drinking a lot of wine or alcohol. And so when they drink, they might become volatile and aggressive or really sweet. And at other times they're different. And so this child's experience is one of intense volatility and instability. There's also, circumstantial events that can happen. Collapse of communism being one thing, right? If there's stuff happening and it's a lot of unsafety, a lot of chaos, that child's interpretation becomes one of chaos and instability. So their overarching sense, their overarching belief about themselves is, I'm going to be betrayed. I can't trust. I can't trust anyone. I can't trust my situation. I'm unsafe. All of the insecure attachment styles believe they're unsafe, of course. And I must be therefore unworthy of having safety, of having love, of having stability, because I'm going to be betrayed the whole time. And also they might develop other beliefs that stem from the anxious and dismissive. So if I look at my own upbringing, I was very much anxious, but I also had that fearful avoidance where I had trust issues later in life. You know, my father was, again, on off, loving father, but just traveling a lot. So I grew up with a lot of trust issues around men of, will they show up for me or are they going to leave? Will they be here or are they going to send me up, you know? And so these different patterns show up in our relationships, but of course, they show up in our relationship with money, because we all have a relationship with money, which is, you know, all too well.
It is. And when you're talking, I mean, it just, so one thing is, of course, the relationships to others, but then it's the relationship to yourself.
Yeah.
Because when you were talking about those issues, like, you know, issues with trusting oneself, feeling that I'm bad or I'm not worthy, or like these topics, of course, they come up in our romantic relationship with others, but in the end, it's our relationship to ourselves, I think, right? And of course, then that's money, that's our career, that's everything around us that is kind of influenced by this. And probably 99% of the people walking around in the world are never like looking inside and realizing this, that it's driving so much of their behavior. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's all unconscious, right? It's all unconscious. And the most challenging thing I would argue is that a lot of people who come to me have already done a lot of personal development. They've probably been in therapy for multiple years. They've read the books. They're trying, and they know that there are problems. They know that, hold on a second, I get really triggered around X, Y, and Z, or, you know, when my partner leaves, I feel really lonely and really distressed, or I'm often paranoid about infidelity, or I can't seem to make money, or I can't seem to hold money. I keep spending it. Whatever the problem is, they can be aware of it, and you can talk about it in therapy, but that's not enough. Because remember, your subconscious mind is 95 to 97% of your brain, and simply talking about it does not actually recondition the brain. It can do, but it takes forever. It takes a very long time, because you're using one modality. In order to really shift these patterns at a root cause level, you need to go much deeper, and you need to know how to work with the subconscious. And that's why hypnotherapy, for example, can be so powerful when it's applied correctly. That's why these different subconscious mind modalities can be so effective and get the results of clearing these behavioral patterns so much faster. And what I do.
It's such a deep work that you have to do. I'd love to ask our audience as well, if you feel like it, please feel free to share if some of these attachment styles or some of the things that Katarina was sharing resonates with you. Does something come up? I know for myself, I'm like, oh my God, my mind is bubbling with all these, with myself, people around me. How about you, Sophie? Does something come to your mind?
Definitely, because also we said, of course, the word of caution at the beginning. Please try not to really self-diagnose, but of course, we're probably all doing it kind of in the background. So I started thinking of the anxious attachment style, because I have this tendency to really have difficulties letting go. But as you progressed in describing, I really could more relate to the last one, with the chaotic childhood and this kind of like double-edged sword that I can really see playing out in my relationships in general, and maybe also when it comes to money. So that was.
I actually want to add to that, to adding to you, Sophie, there is that a lot of entrepreneurs are fearful avoidant, disorganized attachments. And my hypothesis with this is that if you grow up with a very volatile childhood, one of the outcomes, one of the positive outcomes of it, is that you actually become very good at reading the room, and you become very good at kind of staying hypervigilant and analyzing the situation and reading people's body language and reading people's expressions. And then you become very good at shape shifting, at adapting yourself to please the other person. That's a survival mechanism, right? And so guess what? You become very charismatic. You become very good at being able to communicate with different people, at being adaptable. And I would argue these are skills that entrepreneurs generally need, right? Especially if you're trying to be successful and at the top. You need to be able to compartmentalize, which is that avoidant trait. You also probably have that anxious tendency of really wanting to do really well and really wanting to prove yourself and really wanting to succeed. And so all of these come together in a cocktail in the fearful avoidant attachment style. Right. And I would argue that's probably why I have so many clients. It's also no surprise that I don't really have that many dismissive avoidant clients because guess what? They don't really want to do the emotional work.
You don't want the help, probably, right?
Well, I'm
On
sure they
this
want the help.
okay.
They want the help, but it's the idea of sitting down and having to go into that emotional world and unpack it that can feel really daunting and frightening and make them feel out of control and even more powerless and even more weak. And so I actually have, maybe out of 30 clients, I have maybe 3 dismissal avoidant clients who I celebrate and applaud every day for being so brave and stepping up and doing this work. It's fascinating who actually feels comfortable to even get support in the first place.
Yeah,
But it's amazing because then it means that you have to create that psychological safety in your workspace so that these people can come there and even dragging their feet because they really want the change. So it's like going towards that zone of discomfort. And amazing.
Yes.
But what about money now? I mean, what do you think is at play when it comes to money and relationships?
Yeah. So there's 2 different things to talk about here, right? There's the relationship that we have with money individually, which is absolutely stemming from our attachment styles and our own blocks. And there's also the question of money and the actual relationship itself, which is going to be informed by your own relationship with money. And, it's so interesting how I never really looked at my relationship with money all that much. I knew I could make enough and it was fine. I was focused on my romantic relationships. And it was only when I began my business that I had to start tracking revenue. I had to start, rolling my sleeves up and learning how to scale and learning how to really work with money, that I realized, holy cow, I'm so anxious with money. And it's fascinating how we can recondition one area of our lives and still have more work to do on the other. So, I mentioned earlier that I have that bad wound still flaring up sometimes. That shows up sometimes in my relationship with money, especially if an accountant emails me and there's an urgent notice. I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? I'm a bad person, the tax person. It's so funny how I have this very visceral reaction, which I know is stemming from that core wound. Hence, I practice what I preach and I do my own work. So the point is that if you have a sense of not being good enough, not being safe, then guess what? It's never going to feel like you have enough money and you're never going to feel safe with money. And this is the trap I see a lot of people falling into, and the trap I myself found myself falling into of, when is it ever going to be enough? I worked with a billionaire last year, a billionaire. He still didn't feel it was enough. He was still working and grinding at the detriment of his relationship and thus feeling lonely. His children wouldn't talk to him. His wife wouldn't lay the table for him because he's grinding and he's working because he doesn't feel that it's enough. And it was this vicious cycle of more loneliness at the top and still not having enough, and then grinding and burning out. He also had a wound around feeling powerless. And so what is money? Money gives us power. And so if you have a core wound around feeling powerless, you will be seeking money to give you more power. And so, yes, you can absolutely go down that route and try to make as much money as possible. I would argue it's much more effective to solve for the core wound, to solve for the block, rewire that powerless belief, rewire that belief that it's not good enough. And from that space, decide what is going to be enough for me. What is enough for me? And that's a decision that I've made for myself and my business. And I can tell you now, my quality of life has improved exponentially. And I'm not any less ambitious. I'm just not so attached in that frenzied, anxious way to the outcome. I know that not only can I achieve my goal, but either way, I'm more than enough. I'm good. I'm safe. I'm loved. I'll be connected. Everything is fine. And so my approach in my work, in my relationship with money, is much more open and expansive. And ironically, I see more opportunities. I have more creativity. And thus, I find this consistently. When people actually clear out their own subconscious blocks, their income does improve. Their income actually goes up because they're thinking more clearly. They're thinking more creatively. Their nervous system is able to actually hold and expand and receive more wealth and abundance. Because again, if you are constricted, if you are tight, if you are afraid, if you are anxious, if you feel that you are weak and helpless and powerless and trapped, more money is going to just make you feel worse because you're going to have more responsibilities. You're going to have more pressure. You're going to have to keep producing more. You're going to have to manage more. You're going to feel more trapped in the long run, right? You're going to feel more alone because, oh my goodness, people might betray me. All these different wounds can start flaring up as we accrue more money. And so guess what? People self-sabotage. And there's a thing I say to all my clients, I don't really believe in self-sabotage because there's no really such thing. Our subconscious mind is not trying to hurt us. It's not trying to screw us over. Our subconscious mind is doing its best to get our needs met and ultimately to keep us safe. And so again, if I have a belief that I'm trapped and I'm weak and I'm helpless, I'm going to be betrayed and I'm alone, I'm not going to want more money on a subconscious level because money is going to be associated with being trapped and people taking it from me and people betraying me and then me being lonely at the top and people being jealous of me. And oh my goodness, my parents might reject me because if I make more money than them, then I'm abandoning them. All of these different fears can stem. And so we will subconsciously reject money, or if we make it, spend it, gamble, whatever whatever behaviors might come up, develop an addiction of some sorts. And that becomes the quote unquote self-sabotage, but it's not really self-sabotage. It's your brain recognizing that, hold on a second, here is who I am. And so I'm protecting you by making sure that you don't have this thing, money, that is so loaded and scary. And same thing can happen with relationships, right? Again, if you have a belief that you're going to be betrayed, of course, you're going to really want to settle for a relationship. If you have a belief that you're trapped, you're probably not going to want a relationship. So it's so fascinating how these blocks can seem so kind of innocent. No one intended them for them to be there, but they impact our lives in such huge ways.
Yes. It is really, and this what you were saying, right? It's our brain trying to keep us safe, but it's exactly then potentially doing in a way the opposite, right? But it's such a strong instinct for us to protect ourselves. It happens naturally. Like if there is that fear, whether it's a real whatever tiger attacking us or whatever, but this is like this unconscious or subconscious fear, right? Then you are going to protect yourself no matter what, even if it results in issues in many other areas, right? And how can we stop that then from happening, right? Because I see this, and I know Sophie and our work, we work with a lot of women, and they often have also these issues, right? Where I think you were saying is like, can you hold a certain amount of money in a way? If your brain is almost not set up to that level that you can safely receive and hold and earn a certain amount of money, you will in a way like just return to that earlier level, right? So yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
There's a number of things that we have to do. Ultimately, all of it can be distilled down into regulating or kind of quote unquote healing the nervous system, and also removing those subconscious blocks, right? And all of that is absolutely doable. The brain has neuroplasticity. We can, quote unquote, rewire ourselves. We can actually recondition ourselves to not have these blocks. And unfortunately, this is where the medicine comes in that most people don't like. It's going to be discipline. But, it's discipline. I can give my clients the tools, which I have, an abundance of tools. And one of the things I'm very passionate about is meeting people where they're at. Even if you're on a plane 24/7 because you're so busy and you have no time, I will have tools for you. I will have strategies for you to get you to recondition your brain and eliminate these subconscious blocks. I will help you. You have to do them. I cannot go in there and give you a brain transplant, right? I do hypnotherapy. I do hypnotherapy. I've trained in that. But unless you're going to, do hypnotherapy with me every single week, which you can do, absolutely, it's more effective, I would argue, if you're able to actually manage your own brain, right? So in all of my work, when clients work with me, I have essentially a library of tools and techniques and strategies and processes that I direct them to once I know their personality a little bit of, okay, right, we're going to start with this, and we're going to do that, then we're going to do this. It doesn't have to take long. It can be 15 minutes a day. Really, it can be as short as that. You just have to continuously show up. And when you show up, emotion plus repetition equals shifting neural pathways. You will see the changes. And so, again, if I use myself as an example, once I started building a business, I recognized that, okay, I have an upper limit, which is, what we talked about, what you mentioned about how I have this kind of baseline of wealth that I'm comfortable with, which funnily enough, guess what, was the amount of wealth my father had. There was a subconscious belief there that if I actually make more money than my father, I'm going to be a bad daughter because I'm abandoning him and betraying the family who are all struggling financially. There was also a fear there that if I start making more money than my family, they're going to come after me and they're going to trap me by wanting to get help from me, right? So there's all of this cocktail of fears and beliefs and loyalties and cultural conditioning and all of this stuff that was really making me kind of stay small and stay loyal to my family. I see that a lot in a lot of people. There's also one more belief I actually wanted to share that I was working with a client on yesterday. And this is a really common one I see is if I make a lot of money and I'm not killing myself in the process, I must somehow be a bad, unethical person, right? Like in order to make a lot of money, I have to work really hard. I have to struggle. And that was one of my beliefs too, that I have to really struggle. I have to really prove that I'm a good person by working hard and doing honest work. And so in the first couple of years of my business, I was doing 12, 15 hours a day. And so the money was coming, but I was working hard, and every time someone asked me how my business was doing, I was like, it's going really well, but I'm working hard. I'm doing 12 hours a day. Yes. A little badge of honor of like, and I see that with a lot of my clients where I ask them how they are, like, oh, work's terrible. Like, oh, I'm so struggling. Oh, everything's so, and it's this kind of unconscious need to prove that, hold on a second, I am a good person and I'm not just whatever the judgment is that, I'm naturally just, which is obviously nonsense because money is just energy. It's just energy. Yeah. Like there's no correlation between your worth and how much money you make. There's some of the best people in the world make no money, unfortunately. But also some of the best people make a lot of money. Like it really doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean it's self-worth is not net worth, right? Or the other way around, right? But this was so interesting when you were talking about this billionaire who was still not feeling safe inside. So if a billionaire, oh, Sophie's out. Well, she's coming back. If a billionaire is not feeling safe inside with the level of money that they have, then really who can ever feel safe, right? So it's so interesting because this really your internal feeling of security doesn't come from that.
And that was something sorry,
please.
go on.
No, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that it was actually working with that billionaire that really showed to me that this is not a game I want to play. This is not a game I want to play. I was seeing my business grow and money come in and blah, blah, blah. And I made a decision. I was like, I am not prepared to play this game where I'm going to really scale and then keep grinding at the cost of my marriage, at the cost of my health and happiness. And so I made a decision that I'm choosing to be enough and I'm choosing to know that I'm enough and that I'm absolutely capable. I could print money tomorrow if I wanted to. And I still intend to, absolutely. But I'm choosing to make that be almost kind of separate to anything about me. It is just, it's one of my coaches back in the day, she said, it's so funny how we have so much meaning attached to the word money. What if we just exchanged the word money with something random like carrots? The word carrot. How ridiculous would it be? It's like, I don't have enough carrots. I need more carrots. No, you have more than enough carrots to have a good life. You can want more carrots, absolutely. Go nuts. You can have all the carrots in the world. It doesn't mean anything about you. And carrots don't hold any power over you. So the moment you can start to neutralize yourself and separate yourself and your identity and your worth from money and recognize that money is just an energy, this is a neutral energy, then it becomes actually much easier to make it because you get off that roller coaster of ups and downs. And, and so for me, money is kind of carrots. Now I'm like, I want to double the carrots I have. And then I'm probably going to give a load of carrots away to animals. I love animals. And I have ambitious goals for the carrot farm I want to have. But it's like, if I don't make any carrots, it's also fine. I've got more.
I love that. That's brilliant because it just takes that edge off from the loaded word of money.
Totally.
It's so cool.
And I think it's so important as well because of what you were saying earlier of the kind of projections that we tend to have onto money, and which can be from these wounds, as you say. We can project this on relationships, we can project this on money, on work, on different things, and maybe all our relationships actually. So it's important to neutralize it and to be able to see that also that thing we're looking for, whether it's power, security, freedom, whatever it is, we can cultivate inside, right? And it's so crucial.
Yeah, that's a really good point you just mentioned there, actually. And I see this in dating a lot of the time when women are looking for a male partner, and men looking for female partners. And, everyone's got their kind of mentality of how much money they want their partner to be making, how much money they need their partner to be making to feel safe with them, to know that they're like a worthy candidate and that they can protect and provide for me. The reality is, I mean, again, unless you want to be a stay-at-home mother, which absolutely, then it makes sense. But if you have any semblance of career ambition, money's not that important. So what's money representing for you here? Money's representing safety, as you said, right? Safety, probably a sense of abundance. But again, you want to be dealing with your own blocks around this, because if you don't feel good enough, no partner's ever going to be good enough for you, and no partner's going to ever make enough money for you. So that needs to go. Otherwise, you'll be perpetually unhappy. And also, you need to get clear on what is money the proxy for, and start solving for that yourself, with yourself. So you stop attaching that need to somebody else who really you have no control whether they're going to solve it for you or not. As soon as you do that, your world opens up and you can actually meet a perfectly wonderful partner who maybe isn't at their peak earning potential. I met my husband who was unemployed. And it was funny, before I met him, I was like, I'm only going to be with a multi-millionaire because I don't want to deal with all the stuff. And I used to have a problem with my previous partners that I would earn more money than them and I would emasculate them, right? So when it came to meeting my husband, I was like, I need to be with a man who makes more money than me. And then I met someone who was literally unemployed and a high school teacher. And I had to work through my blocks because I was like, I love this man. It's not going to work. I need to get over myself.
Okay, yes, Katarina, you work so much with these high-performing individuals. How often does the topic of money come into the discussion when you are talking about the relationships with them, right? Their issues. Is that a topic? And also we have some comments. My favorite question from Charlotte: what is enough? I would love to know steps each of you have taken to figure out your enough. Okay, that's a wonderful
question. That's a great question. So I'll answer both. Firstly, yes, money comes up a lot. More often than not, what I find is that the person I am working with has their own money scarcity challenges and their own money blocks, and they're not feeling safe. And so often they are the ones who are going to be working really hard and trying to overcompensate and trying to make all of that money, and then in the process neglecting their partner, and thus the relational challenges. Or they might come to me and say, this is an interesting one I've had more recently, I've done it. I've made all the money. I had one client say to me, I've made enough money for 10 of me. There are 10 of me out there right now, just pumping out money. So I made all this money. My relationship still sucks. My wife's still not happy. Well, because it was never about the money. It was never about the money, right? And so absolutely, it's kind of mirror to seeing what's going on deeper at play. To the other question around which my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, the question was, when do we know each of ours enough? When do we know that it's enough? Yeah. Is that right? I would love to know your steps to figure out your enough.
How do you figure out when it is enough, right?
Yeah. So there's two layers to it, right? There's the layer of the very literal, strategic, where do you live in the world? What is the cost of living there? How much do you actually need to get by? What kind of a home do you need? What kind of assets do you need to be able to retire at what age? There's very literal numbers. But those numbers, I find, are generally lower than what we imagine. I had one client who came to me and told me that in order to retire, he needed 20 million. I was like, on what planet do you need 20 million? You don't need 20 million. And when we actually sat down and broke the numbers down, we realized that at the age of 56, he already had enough in investments to retire. He actually had more than enough. But that leads into the second point, the not enoughness wound. That needs to go. That's the most important piece, because you can sit here and rationalize and logic your way through arguing this is enough. But if on an internal level, your subconscious and your nervous system is scrambling around for more, because it just doesn't feel enough, it doesn't feel safe, nothing will ever feel enough, and no amount of rationalization will feel enough. And so I would argue that the not enough wound, along with the abandonment wound, are probably the biggest wounds that I see, and the unworthy one. amongst people. And I would also argue that, yes, it comes down to our conditioning from childhood and our primary caregivers and all of the stuff that happens. But also society, this capitalist world that we live in, perpetuates that wound. It really rubs salt into it every single day, because you turn on the TV, you turn on the internet, you turn on anything, we're getting advertised more and more things that tell us that you are not enough until you have this thing. You are not enough until you have 1.5 million likes. You're not enough until you have X, Y, and Z in the bank, until you have, till you're like the Kardashians, right? We're fed this message that we are simply not enough. And the funny thing is, a lot of my peers, other women who are, running businesses like myself, a lot of us, and I would argue actually myself included at the end of last year, are going through a bit of a midlife crisis. And I was reflecting on this and exploring it and really tuning into, what is this midlife crisis about? And I thought, I think I have depression. I think there's something wrong with me. Oh my goodness. I've done all this work on myself, and I kept saying, I've come this far in my business. I've made all this money, and I've got this marriage, and the marriage is wonderful. And I have these friends, and I have this great relationship with my family, and my health is really good. And I've got these animals, and I feel really, everything in my life is great, apart from climate change and geopolitical issues. But, everything in my life is great. Why do I feel so lost, And I thought I had a midlife crisis. And I spoke to other women in the same situation. And what I realized is we're letting go of that capitalist narrative of not being enough. And we recognize that actually we have enough. And that requires stepping out of the system a little bit and coming back to ourselves, to our authentic selves. And what do our authentic selves really want? What does any human throughout history generally really want? They want time in nature, time to play, time to have a bit of purpose, time to be with their loved ones, to feel belonging. That's kind of it. And all of this other stuff that we've created around it, the big house, the career, the car, the status, blah, blah, blah. It's all just a proxy trying to get us to feeling enough. And so there's this paradox here where the more enough that I have felt, the more recognizing I am of, I have to step out of the system. I have to exit this cultural narrative that I have to keep aspiring for more, because I can aspire for more, but I can be detached from it because I have enough now.
Being content, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah,
I was
so
reading
fascinating.
A fantastic book by Morgan Housel, who wrote the Psychology of Money. He has a new book called The Art of Spending Money, and he talks a lot also about this. It was really fantastic. How many people are so much doing it kind of for the wrong purposes, right? And they never come to realize what are the real things that are making them happy. Of course, you need a subsistence level, fine. You need some financial security that you're, obviously that's like a basic level, you have to be there. But then after that, it's all inside the mind, right? What are you really happy with? But for humans, we are built to be striving and constantly comparing. That's how we evolved, right? How would we otherwise have developed all these things that we have? We are constantly doing this comparison, and it's a bit sad in a way.
It's very interesting, and also I would add it's something okay, but we also have to realize the way we approach this thriving is really important, because the goals that we're setting, for example, when we're creating our own business, is really about how can we approach them in a manner that is still healthy for our mind. So not falling again into that trap of the not enough, because I guess I was suffering a bit from it as well, probably still am. I think what has helped me is definitely discipline, but even in discipline and in self-discovery and personal development, there's also this trap of not enough. I actually see this sometimes with some clients, and I have to actually be there to hold them and say, that's fine, everything is okay. Actually, you're doing really fine and great. And they're like, no, there's really something wrong. There's really something, I need more. I need to do more exercise. And you can see it when it's not about you. And somehow it's the part that also helps us to maybe implement this concretely. So it's it's the forever work almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It comes down to that not enoughness, right? And you absolutely with the discipline piece, I've not done enough, or I've not done enough personal development, or I've not done enough. You have to know what enough is. And again, back to the point, there are some very tangible, real, you can't say you've done enough personal development if you've never talked to a therapist or a coach, I would argue. You want to at least cross that off your list and make sure that you've actually applied some work. But beyond that, it is that deeper subconscious block that needs to go. And that is a subconscious and a nervous system issue that requires a two-pronged approach, cognitive approach and a somatic, working with the body. And both of those can be done in lots of different ways. I have lots of different modalities. And yeah, great question about the
That's exactly that question as well.
For the last few minutes, I think we're getting...
absolutely. So, I mean, that's a fantastic question. And I don't even know how I can answer that in such a short amount of time, because I would argue I'm a bit of a junkie for developing, for incorporating tools and techniques, right? Because there isn't one tool or technique that's going to work for everyone. It's why in 2007, I trained in hypnotherapy. I trained in NLP. I think a lot of people did back then. Then I did breathwork teacher training. Then I did mindfulness teacher training. Like I'm such a fiend for qualifications and training, which is probably coming from my own not enoughness around having credentials.
There we go.
But I genuinely enjoy understanding how the subconscious works and how the body works. And there are so many different modalities to apply. What I find most important is finding the modalities that work for you individually and that you can be consistent with, So I know for me, the modalities that I've been consistent with are cognitive processing. So doing a lot of the actual kind of daily reconditioning work on kind of like daily brain workouts to literally recondition and rewire. I don't like the term rewire, I keep saying recondition, but doing these on a daily basis. And then also for me, what's been really helpful is, again, just having very simple somatic techniques, which I now incorporate on a moment-to-moment basis. So the other day, I felt a little bit of anxiety towards the evening, and I was like, okay, something's flaring up. Let me go take 3 minutes to go inward and to actually go process and recondition in real time. And so there's, again, that's just my way of doing it, right? Other clients might park it and then come back to it later. So there's lots of different tools and techniques that I love to teach to make sure that you find your way, because that's the most important thing, that you find your unique configuration and you stick to it.
Absolutely. I think there's so many interesting ones. Like also you mentioned hypnotherapy earlier, but others like journaling, whatever. Like there's so many different techniques, right? But sticking to it and noticing when you're getting a bit off, right? And then getting kind of back centered, right? But it's not easy, right? Even us who work with this, since years, like we find new blocks about ourselves, right? And we are still learning, right? So it's an endless journey in a way, but so rewarding one, right? So important one.
As you level up, I tell all my clients that I will never trust a coach who doesn't have their own coach, because I want to be with people who are leveling up. I spent actually last year, I really struggled to find another coach because I found that a lot of people were, this sounds terrible, but kind of not quite at the level that I'd actually come to, and I was like, no, I want someone who's 10 years ahead of me, who's been doing this for 10 years more, has more wisdom to bring, and can meet me where I'm trying to get to. And that's not because I'm not enough. It's because I believe in growth. I believe in evolution. And I want to know, I understand that as we level up to a new level, whether it's a new relationship, a new level of happiness in your marriage, a new level of wealth and abundance, a new business, more blocks are going to come. That's just what happens. It's normal. So you want to have that accountability and discipline to keep tending to them. Otherwise, you're going to revert back to your status quo.
Yes,
this is
absolutely.
Amazing. We've covered so much, but it's time maybe to slowly get to the close, actually, of this amazing conversation. So I think what happens is what you said, right? Is in fact with money, like with all meaningful relationships, it's something that we don't solve once and for all. So we need to continue working on it. We need to pay attention to it. And also what you said, very important, that we need to start with ourselves. So I'm going to take that with me for sure. I'm sure the audience will have many different perspectives and takeaways. I don't know, Mina, what would it be for you?
Yeah, I took so many things actually out of this, but I really loved the discussion around the attachment styles. I realized I still have like so much work to do on that. I think I've never really, I mean, I've done a lot of work already, but I need to go way deeper. You need to kind of recognize the points where it's most painful to you almost and go exactly there.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Be a
So when
masochist.
you
Yeah.
recognize something where you're a bit uncomfortable, like that's a tip. You need to go there because that's where you get the most growth in a way, right?
100%.
But it's so hard and you
I
have to do
know.
it.
But I'll give you a quick little pro tip on that. I know we're coming to time. It's that you are separate to the behaviors and you are separate to the blocks, right?
Yes.
So for any person out there who's listening, who's like, oh, but I don't want to look into this stuff because it's going to be scary and I'm going to be broken and I'm going to have shame and and I'm in my 40s and I've had this thing for so long. Doesn't matter. Clients come to me in their 60s and they're still able to recondition their brain. The point is, it's not your fault. None of this stuff is our fault. It's just how the brain works. It's just how we work as human beings. And without your subconscious blocks, you wouldn't have half of the life experience you've had anyway. So the point is, you want to just, again, neutralize that relationship. And to your point, Mina, whenever I spot a block, I'm like, aha, it's like whack-a-mole. I'm like, oh, another thing to go after, and I dive into it. And now my relationship with it is like, this is kind of fun because I know once I eradicate the block, a leveling up happens. I'm like, whoop, and I see it whether it's in my income or in my happiness or in my health. I'm like, something good is going to come at the back of it. So I've conditioned myself to be really excited and like love it and not take it personally. It's not my fault.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Like looking for them and like having that, yes, it's going to be maybe slightly effort, right? But then exactly the relief is also there. So like you said, it's not going to mean like years of wallowing. I mean, for some people, there might be some painful things to go through as well, but the relief is also there, right? And you will get, in a way, rewarded from doing that work because you will feel better. You will feel like you're more open, right? You have this abundance.
You'll make more money, candidly.
Well, also, right?
Make more money.
So
you can see it in your bank.
It's really rewarding as well. No, but thank you so much, Katarina, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. We know we could talk to you for hours and we would learn so much. So thank you so much. Do you have anything you'd like to share to the audience? How they can find you? Anything you'd like to mention?
Yeah. Best place to start is to go to my website, www.katarina, Katarina, Polonska, Polonska.com. And on there, you can find a few little short videos explaining more about the work, find my podcast, lots of resources there. And then if you want to reach out to me, you can either book a call on my website or find me on LinkedIn. Just search for Katarina Polonska, and I should come up there as hopefully the first person.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Katarina. Thank you, Mina. Thank you to all the wonderful Flourish Financially audience. And maybe some of you are even catching the video in replay. So we're going to continue with this season of Flourish Financially Money Conversations. And if you want to touch base with Katarina, you know where to find her. And as for us, we're going to be there in about a month's time for our next money conversation. So stay tuned. Thanks a lot, everyone. It was a real pleasure, and see you all later. Continue to flourish.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Best. Bye-bye.
Bye.